St. Moses the Black isn't the only, dark-skinned saint the church has. You see what I'm saying? So clearly, it isn't about phenotype. And then once you show that to someone empirically, right, the Synoxarian just shows that's just empirical fact. From there, someone now has to make the decision, okay, do I even want to be Orthodox? Because I've seen this too. I've seen where some people go like, nah, maybe I should go back to Odinism, or maybe I should go back to something else. Oh, no, really, I mean, it's funny, but I have encountered that, where someone may be like, maybe I just need to go be a Christian identitarian, right? Where like Christian identity, which is, kind of white nationalist, maybe I need to do that. Maybe you do. Because and that doesn't mean that the Orthodox Church is infected with ecumenists and liberals and lefties and gays and every pejorative term they want to throw out. It just means that that's what it is. And so you have to show people, are you actually coming to the body of Christ? Are you actually coming to Christ as he is and the church as she is historically? Or do you want to project your own sickness on her, right? Which goes left or right. That's a big thing for me. We could have a whole other conversation if you wanted about not just race, but let's say sexual identity or something else, right? And this is what I try to point out to people. It's the same thing, because when you get them in a corner, white nationalists, Hebrew Israelites, whatever, they have the same talking points because they have the same spirit as someone who's LGBTQ. Because the same spiritual motivation is driving them. It's idolatry. It's hyperfixation on one's identity, which is a projection of self, right? It's Luciferic, right? They don't have a concept of the other. Their concept of the other is just enough to facilitate a kind of primal desire for procreation, but it doesn't transcend anything further than that. So they can't enter into even like human levels of discussion, or let alone getting into theology or divine, because to enter into that, you have to start understanding the other. I know I'm kind of getting into waters, but you have to have these situations laid out so that you can really navigate the mind or the headspace in which people are like coming to these places of, ideology, or I think this, or I think that, as opposed to what the church has clearly laid out, not even doctrinally, but even in our praxis. And again, like I said, in our hymnography, in our hagiography, our saints, right? Sorry, I know that's a lot, but are you?
Well, you said something very interesting there, because when you were at the beginning, you were talking about how Christ brings us together. And what you were just talking about there is how this ideology, how these idols tear us apart. And of course, you mentioned earlier how one of the titles of the devil is the divider. And that's really what these kinds of sins are. It's like, I want to be different. I don't want to be the same as you. I don't want to be like you. I don't want to have the same God as you. I don't want to have the same whatever as you. I want to be different. And what all that does is introduce into that person's life, for the most part, I think, is a separateness and a loneliness that cannot be overcome by anything else, including the ideology that they put at so high a level that they just can't do it any other way.
Well, the thing is forgive me, we can talk about, let's say, British people now, but what do we mean 300 years ago? What do you mean, 800 years ago? What are we talking about? Like my brother-in-law, he's from Essex, right? Well, what are we talking about, right? And the reason why I'm saying that is because, the goalposts, or what groups people, changes over time. And that's the thing is, in the Orthodox Church, we're trying to be anchored to something, to someone, which is grounded in eternity. It's one of those things where it's not in particular about race, and I feel like, forgive me if I've taken the conversation way off into the clouds, but
no, you're good.
It's like I try to explain to some people, the Byzantine Empire fell for a reason, and so did Russia. People, I mean, don't look at me as, I'm telling, this is St. John of Kronstadt talks about this. St. Seraphim Sarab talked about it, St. John Maximovich talked about this in regards of the diaspora and what God's intention was in regards of spreading Orthodoxy, right? And the chastisement of the quote unquote Rus. That's a thing. So what you see is, what people have in regards of what they're trying to preserve is oftentimes opposed to what God is trying to do. And in that preservation of something, they bring upon themselves chastisement. Because preservation isn't just about keeping your numbers alive. For the Rus, it was, there was a real moving away from the things that made them, quote unquote, sweet to God, and the attempt to try to pursue, we see it today still, trying to emulate, the West, trying to emulate, and so this is important because again, I would reiterate that happened on the macro, it happens on the micro, where people are so focused on trying to establish out of vanity one aspect of identity to the detriment of their salvation, the detriment of the larger picture, right? So I think with all that, maybe you can come back down to earth and start talking about like grace in America, whatever. But I think the thing is I would sum it up in a more succinct manner by saying Orthodox Christians need to first understand who they are as a race. Like when we talked about mixed marriages, we're not talking about, Korean and Scottish. We're talking about, is the person Orthodox or not? Canonically, that's like when you write a bishop, I have a mixed marriage. The bishop, unless, bishops get sick too, right? But the bishop, generally speaking, is going to be like, oh, okay, is she, is the wife a Protestant or is she a Buddhist? Like that's what everyone thinks
That's
of
what
when
he cares about, yeah.
Marriage in the Orthodox Church, right? So that tells you something. Why? Because it's that shared life, which is what makes a people, right? So from there, I'm saying Orthodox Christians need to kind of get that straight in regards of what it means to be actually Orthodox, truly.
Yeah.
To answer some of these questions, because my next movement from there is, if you want to talk about some of the particularities, it's like, I'm working on this documentary called Mystery Meaning, from the cotton fields to the battlefield of Kosovo. And I'm looking at working off of a thesis that I presented at the Ledwell conference this past year about the Civil War as a kind of defining moment in American life, which has fomented the ongoing fissure in our society. Not just black and white, but left, right, conservative, like all those things are really start to see congeal, Civil War, Reconstruction, civil rights onwards, right? But all of those things, civil rights, Reconstruction, it all obviously initiated at the Civil War. So I'm looking at the Civil War through an actual Orthodox lens. And how is that possible? Well, the fruit of the Civil War in the South is that of the called, they call it, it's coined the lost cause, right? And it's the idea that the South lost because the North plays unfair, and that the South is a more fertile bed ground for higher society and these things like that. The genteel Southern man. There's other things that come along with it. That the African slaves are actually, they enjoyed slavery, just things like this, right? So I try to kind of unpack some of that narrative in the light of the Battle of Kosovo, in which Tsar Lazar and the Serbian people came against the Turkish horde and lost the battle. And that loss of the Battle of Kosovo began to really single out and identify the Serbian people as a Christian people. So their loss on the battlefield and subsequent 500 years, as opposed to 400 years of slavery, and degradation, is what allowed them to be what Saint Nikolai Ivanovich calls the Theodules. And this is very important because we have a working example of an actual people group, not a mythos, but an actual people group who suffered loss and subjugation, slavery, and yet grew in their Christian identity, which their Orthodox identity, which makes sense because Orthodox identity is not facilitated through victory. Orthodox identity is facilitated through the cross, which is fundamentally a loss. The cross can only be understood as a loss. The victory of the cross is understood in the shadow of the resurrection, but the cross is the means by which, on the micro, the person learns to lose and to give up the earthly things for the sake of the greater. So that movement on the micro, the personal level, of a person embracing loss is what unites them and engenders them to Christ. That's having the mind of Christ. And that mind you must have if you're going to be in the kingdom. Why? Because in the kingdom, the people of the kingdom of God are there on free will. No one is there coerced.
Right.
So because of that, when a person, an individual, or a people group are singled out and they have not acquired the mind of Christ, then the question that everyone want to have, forgive me, I'm in the clouds again, but the question people have is like, okay, if the future kingdom of the eschaton is going to be, this perfect paradise and everyone's there of their free will, well, what's to say another Lucifer doesn't arise? How is God going to keep another Lucifer arising? Well, here's how he's going to do it. Because the people groups, which is comprised of individuals, they're going to be there, their free will, which means they acquired the mind of Christ, which not abstractly, praxis and literally is learning to endure the cross, which is personal loss to whatever degree, especially towards one's vanity, right? That you would attain something higher. And so it is in that space that an individual is made worthy of the kingdom of heaven. So the Serbian people, that is the genesis of them truly being these theodules who are now like, I've been to Serbia a couple of times. It's an Orthodox country, truly, meaning the people there, even if they're, lukewarm, don't get me wrong, we have to speak in some degree of generalities, but generally you see it in the culture that there's hospitality. There are these things that are a hallmark of a Christian culture. Just like when you go to a household, if you go to a family, are they hospitable? Do they practice love? Do they have prayer? Does there piety? Well, you see that throughout the culture, right? Where did that come from? It starts at Vidovdan. It starts at the loss of Kosovo. So my project is presenting that as a lens and a corrective for America if we are to eventually be, there's so many people that want America to become an Orthodox country, but what they think is they see it in the light of a false kind of like great Byzantine Empire, when actually an Orthodox America will look more like Serbia through loss. And so I'm submitting that part of the way that could start is looking at the Civil War, in particular for the South. Instead of having sour grapes, you begin to have an actual Christian perspective of how do we take this loss as God's chastisement? God chastens those whom he loves. And in that chastisement, how do we actually become this fertile ground by which the virtues of the Christian life, the Orthodox life, can become disseminated to the rest of the country? Because it's needed, the shared culture.
Yeah, Father, my background is a Macedonian background. I grew up in the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. And growing up in the 60s, I grew up amongst a lot of people for whom the Balkan Wars were not that far in the past. Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, very much involved in fighting each other over a 5-6 year period over a small amount of territory. And growing up in the 60s and 70s, it seemed like everybody still very much self-identified as, and I'm talking about the people I grew up amongst in the Los Angeles area, were very much, Serbian, and the Serbs didn't do much with the Bulgarians, and nobody did anything with the Greek because they felt very self-sufficient anyway. And when I went to Greece a year ago, and twice, and then before that, when I went to Turkey and met people from Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, it seems that in the 110 years since the Balkan Wars, that the people in the Balkans no longer fighting over territory, although the great Greeks tend to make a big mess over the name Macedonia. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, it seems like when you talk to people in the Balkans, Serbians go into Greece all the time, and the Bulgarians come down to Mount Athos, and the Romanians really come down to Mount Athos, and people from there go here to buy stuff and go tour. It seems like there's more of the sense of one people now in that region.
Orthodox culture.
Yeah, exactly. That you didn't see in the past, but you see it now, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fall of communism, which actually exacerbated the sense of separatedness. Mm-hmm. That's why we have a separate Macedonian church now, for example. But it does seem like they're starting to identify more along the lines of we are Orthodox brothers and sisters. And you even see funny things at soccer matches where big banners of iconographic banners come out, our brothers are, playing on the field and things like that. And that's good to see. Were that we were to have more of that here in America, I think sometimes.
Well, Father Jonathan, I think that's the way forward, actually. I think that that's the general sense to a greater degree than some of the look, you're always going to have that guy in the corner who hates Serbs, who hates Bulgarians, who hates whatever. You're always going to have that. But generally speaking, you do see a growing sense of Orthodox culture. And it makes a lot of sense, actually, because all of these questions are nestled in a bigger question, which is we're in a very interesting time in the history of the world anyways. We are in a time where, let me digress a little bit to set something up so that people can keep up with me on this. A lot of people don't understand this, and that is, generally speaking, and I'm sure you'll back me up on this, Father. Generally speaking, when icons begin to weep or show some sort of miracle, it's not like it's a wonderful thing, but it's usually a harbinger of something coming. People don't understand this, and a lot of Americans don't understand this. They think, "Oh, this is great." It's like, yeah, if in your parish, you're somewhere, and if you're in Garden Grove, California, and your parish starts having an icon weep, it's wonderful. The grace of God has visited you, but just understand something. The grace of God visits us because the cross is coming. It isn't a pat on the back. It isn't like, oh man, you're so pious and so good. You get rewarded.
You're doing so well. You're doing fantastic.
You're getting rewarded with the miracle working.
Keep doing it.
Keep going. No. It's the cross is coming. And so the reason I'm saying that is because the cross is always the thing that puts forward what Christ wants, which is, remember I was saying way back at the beginning of our conversation, unity, pulling together, the hypostatic union, because community is born with the coming of a storm. That's how it works, because this is a Maximus the Confessor, the pain-pleasure cycle, unfortunately, we learn through pain, unfortunately. It's not God, it's just us. That's our fallen nature. So you're seeing this unity around the world in these Orthodox cultures because everyone's feeling the press of the world is dark right now, objectively dark. And we have these bright spots, but the reason why that is when you go out, it's so much easier to see the stars in the country than it is the city, right? Why is that? Why is it easier to see stars in the country?
No city lights.
Yeah, it's dark.
Darker.
Yeah.
It's darker, right?
Yes.
And so in these dark times, the light of Christ is shining even brighter. The light of Christ hasn't changed.
Right.
What it is the darkness and the false light. These things are being, separated for us by God's hand for a reason, for us to see where we really need to end up. And so I think Americans need to take a cue from that and really find out what is the thing that is going to unite us, which is I'm positing the Orthodox Church, because the particular issues in regards of race are just that. They're particular to America in a way that isn't anywhere else. And I would even say beyond that, I'm not saying that there isn't quote unquote race issues elsewhere, but what I'm saying is when you see it in a particular stripe in other places, it's been imported from America. They've taken on certain ways of viewing race that are distinctly American. Right. And so when you see that, you have to wonder, well, what is the antidote? And again, what I'm saying is the Orthodoxy is, because Orthodoxy addresses, it isn't like quote unquote issues of race come from one particular thing. It's this whole spectrum of things I've been trying to lay out in nuance. Hence why I brought up nuance, because you can't just say black, white, it doesn't work like that. It's far deeper than that, because to Justin's point, if a person who is, let's say, I don't really like black people, I don't like their culture, I think they're all criminals, I think whatever, okay, fine, that's great.
But you'll find online, you'll hear it.
Yeah, sure, which is, what I mean? And here's the thing, I'm all about owning the kernel of truth. Sure. Okay, but how did that happen? Why is that the case? Because watch this. You get yourself what you want, you're gonna find yourself guy from Boston, right? Let's say we have a great white takeover. Guy from Boston, I'm giving you 20 years, you're gonna be at war with the guy in Kentucky. I guarantee it.
Mm.
Because you think that if we could just have a white, meaning, phenotype, straight hair, blonde eye, whatever, very quickly, right? Not even based on other things than just like people in Appalachia do not have the same culture as people in Boston. They don't. And they won't get along. The guy in Boston is going to be like, eventually, man, these white trash, blah, 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 blah. Right. That's
So,
the reality.
yeah. Wow. So you're saying the sickness in us, basically you're saying we're so sick that even if it was like a quote unquote all white nation, we'll still find reasons to destroy one another.
Mhm.
Is that what I'm understanding correctly?
Without Christ, absolutely.
Well,
without
think, when we talk about even the concept of white or black, when I hear black, I've had black people say to me that even within the black community, there is sometimes some
It's not a monolith.
the light skinned black and the dark skinned black being from the field hands to the house blacks and things like that comes from that. But even when you talk about white, I mean, there was a time in American history, only about 100 years ago, when Greeks coming to America in Indiana and Louisiana were attacked by the Klan because of their dark skin. Mm-hmm. And you have the same kind of thing that's happened because of other reasons. So when you talk about white, people tend to think that means just Northern European or Northwest European or whatever. And it's very different from how here in America, how that means the Italians were treated versus the Irish when they came over, versus the Greeks versus anybody else. So there is no monolith in either community, really.
No, and that's exactly my point. Is it's easier to just go like black white because that's such a seemingly disparate.
And it's not.
But what's interesting is that, just to your point, Father, it's like you can go through it, and the thing is it's just a matter of someone's going to be actually honest. And that's the thing, you have to be honest. A lot of people, they don't want to have honest conversation because this nuance puts a wrench in their polemic. Because it strikes down their idol. That's deaf and dumb, and they don't like that. But the polemic has to happen, I guess, because sin needs a justification to exist. And that's why propaganda, these things begin to happen. No sin is propagated because of truth. There's a kernel of truth that's just enough to get you to swallow all the other propaganda. And that's when you have a purely exclusive polemical argument or discussion. That's what that is. You're doing propaganda. If you don't introduce the nuance, you're never going to get to the truth.